Hello Nightfarers, let's talk about Scholar. Scholar has dethroned Recluse now at being my favorite character in the game. He's the most complex character by far now. He's got the most potential for build variety. The more you know, the easier it is to play him. He's a support class, but there are like a million ways to play him, including just turning him into a DPS character if you want. The fact that he's so complex though means that he has a pretty steep learning curve. This is not because he's hard to use, but it's more like that he's a knowledge check. So today I'll share with you all the knowledge that I've accumulated by playing this character. I'll tell you what are some of the best ways to play him, and what are the best perks and relic effects to use on him. I'm also gonna showcase many relic setups that I use with this character, so keep an eye out for that. But first, if you do end up finding this video useful, then please consider subscribing to help me make more stuff like this. I already reached my goal of having 15,000 subscribers this year, but I'm very greedy, so please help me get more. First, let's take a look at his stats. Scholar has the weirdest stat spread of any character. All his stats are mediocre except for two. One is FP, which is better than all of the melee characters, but still significantly worse than any of the caster characters, Duchess included. And so Arcane is his main stat, and what this does is that it speeds up the build-up of all kinds of status effects. Now the game says that he has an S in Arcane, but the game is kinda lying, because it's so much more than Executor, for example, who also has an S in Arcane, so it should be called S plus or something. What this means is that sometimes you'll find yourself applying some status effects with like 2 hits or something, which is very strong. Now, despite your main stat being Arcane, your starter weapon has no status effects and no Arcane scaling. It actually scales off of Dexterity instead. At first, I thought this was a very dumb decision, because it makes your damage be abysmal. But it actually turned out to be a very sensible one, and you'll come to understand why as we go along. Now, the fact that Scholar's damage stats are so low is actually quite freeing. It's like you can use any weapon you want as long as it has a status effect. So you can easily switch between multiple different weapons that have different status effects to inflict as many of those as possible. And you don't necessarily need to care about weapon rarity or even weapon type, because like it's not like you're gonna be dealing much damage anyway. Still, you can deal decent damage with 2 specific weapons that scale only with Arcane, and those are the Rebel Blade and the Rebel Crescent Halberd. And while the damage is decent, overall their movesets kinda suck. So unless they have a status effect that I want, I kinda gravitate towards using other weapons. Now, although you'll be switching between different weapons, you'll mostly still use at least one thrusting sword, because that's the kind of weapon that you start with and the one that you'll find the most from boss rewards, so let's talk about it. Like all Nightfarers, Scholar gets a unique moveset with his preferred weapon type, and the thrusting sword moveset here is phenomenal. Your light attacks are not that special, but you can cancel a light attack by pressing the dodge button, and this will make you dodge backwards while attacking, and you actually get a very generous amount of iframes when you're doing this. This, by the way, is called a feint attack, and it is the exact same as the feint attack that you can do by dodging while charging a heavy attack, except for the fact that you can do it much faster here. After you do a feint attack, your next attack will launch you forward, so that you can continue attacking. There is one thrusting sword that you cannot use the new moveset on though, and that is the Frozen Needle, and this honestly makes it one of my least favorite weapons to use. Like, I will use it to proc Frostbite, but I'm switching to something else as soon as I can. Aside from the unique thrusting sword moveset, Scholar gets a unique dodge. And it's just the Bloodborne dodge basically. It has less iframes than the regular dodge, but you can attack out of it much faster. I think this is by far the second best dodge in the game, and anyone who tells you otherwise just doesn't get it. Like, I've seen someone say it's like the Recluse dodge but worse, because you can't cover as much distance. But that's garbage. It's because you don't cover as much distance that this dodge is so amazing. Like, this dodge paired with the thrusting sword feint attack makes Scholar be potentially one of the most aggressive melee fighters in the entire game. Like, if you have the stamina for it, you basically never have to stop attacking. Now let's talk about Scholar's abilities. His passive is Bagcraft, and this makes him be able to carry twice as many things in one item slot as any other character. And when he uses an item, he gets to level up the category of items it belongs to make them more effective. So you want to go around and use any items that you find. Some items are worth holding on to, while others you should just immediately use as soon as possible to level up that category. Though most items can be either depending on the situation, and you'll come to learn which is which as you continue playing this character. One thing you need to know about leveling up items is that damaging items only level up when you actually damage an enemy. So stop throwing knives or pots on the ground, it's not doing anything. Although looting pots can be used on nothing if you want, because their purpose is not even to deal damage. One thing you should know about leveling up items is that you don't need to pick them up in order to use them. You can just use them off of the ground by pressing triangle or Y and then up on the D-pad. Using items on the ground can be your best friend because you can level up quickly without having to use a slot. Just remember that you cannot do that with damaging items unless you hit an enemy. You should know that one of Scholar's best relic effects is one that makes item effects apply to other teammates, and this does apply the leveled up effects on them too, so it's very useful. One of the best pre-made relics that has this effect is Knight of the Fathom, which also gives you better maximum HP and lets you heal your teammates with your flasks. which are both amazing effects, so this is very hard to replace. If you're gonna start buffing yourself and your teammates with items, then you should probably know which buffs stack and which don't. Boiled crabs and exalted flesh don't stack because they're both of the same buff type, but each of them does stack with pickled turtlenecks, despite all of them being food items. Another one you want to look out for is the fact that Golden Vow does not stack with Uplifting Aromatic. You might think that this is wrong because you still get to keep the bubble. But the bubble is only part of what Uplifting Aromatic does, because it also gives you a 10% damage increase. Overall, Golden Vow is better though, so if you have both of these, you want to use Uplifting Aromatic first, then use Golden Vow. And then you'll have both the better stat buffs and the protective bubble, which is the best of both worlds. Now, merchants are extremely useful when you're playing Scholar. First, because they can sell you an extra inventory slot, which you pretty much want to buy every single time. And second is because they can guarantee you that you level up some of the best items in the game. There are 9 categories of items that you can level up. Usually leveling up a category once will just increase its effectiveness. So a fire pot will just do more damage, and so on. But at level 3 you usually get unique effects for each item, and so we're gonna go over how effective these are and some tips I have for them. I'll also mention if they work with the confer items to teammates relic effect. This section will be extremely long because of just how many items there are. Feel free to skip around, or just watch it all if you're really curious. The first category we'll go over are weapon greases. These apply a buff to your weapon that adds elemental damage or a status effect. Leveling these up will increase the damage or build up that you deal with these greases. It also increases their duration. At level 3, the duration of all of these greases is doubled. By default, greases last for 30 seconds. By level 3, they last for 60 seconds. So if you're fighting a lot in melee range, then these are indeed worth holding on to. Shield greases also get both a duration buff and a buff to how much stamina you lose when you get hit using a shield. Using a shield with this character can be worth it, especially against new bosses, because despite what it looks like, even the balancers mostly deal physical damage, and the Dreglord only deals physical damage, and so you don't have to worry about chip damage. Next, let's talk about food. This category is affected by the items conferred to allies relic effect, so you can apply its effects to your teammates. Now by default, the silver foul foot increases item discovery, and the gold foul foot increases rune gain, and leveling these two once will make them more effective at what they do. Leveling them twice though will make it so one of them gives you the effect of the other. So if I use the gold foul foot at level 3, then I get both the item discovery and rune gain. These two effects are pretty good, but it's just kinda hard to time their duration with the actions that they actually affect. Like, I kinda always forget to use my gold foul foot before a boss dies to get more runes. And so mostly I use these two items to level up my proficiency in the food category so that I can use other items. And so the next item in this category is the pickled turtleneck. At level 3, this will increase your maximum stamina, so no reason not to use it. Next in the food category, we have exalted flesh. Normally this increases your physical damage, but at level 3 this will also increase elemental damage. So this is amazing if you're using the Wraith calling bell or if you have a caster in your team. Throwing pots also benefit from this obviously. And even melee characters benefit from this because many of the best weapons have elemental damage. Finally, in the food category we have the goats, the boiled prawn and the boiled crab. These increase physical defense, but at level 3 they also increase your maximum HP by a very significant amount. And because of this, these are probably the best scholar items period, especially if you use this on your teammates. So using this is probably just mandatory for every scholar regardless of playstyle. The next category we have is physics. Now leveling these up once will up their effectiveness, meaning that they will just get better at what they do. So if a physic heals half your health, it will now just heal your full health. If a physic increases your maximum HP, then it now increases that by more. At level 3 though, all physics give you a buff that increases all of your stats by 5 for 2 minutes. This is just insanely good, because you're getting better health, better damage, better stamina, and just better everything. Now to level up physics to level 3, you need to use 3 physics. Now there are 2 that are sold at the normal shop, and there are 3 more at the merchant in day 3. So that's enough for you to level this up to level 3 before the final boss. If you're finishing day 2 with tons of extra runes that you haven't spent, then doing this is always beneficial. Now here's a tip: if you're at the final merchant and you don't have enough money for stuff, then it can be worth it to just jump off the ledge to get your runes back just to level up this category, because the stat increases you get from this are worth more than what you get from one level. If I'm level 15, then I always do this. Of course it's only gonna last for 2 minutes, so whether or not this is worth it depends on the situation you're in. Like, if you already leveled up this category and you buy 2 of them to last you longer, then it might be a net positive. Whether this is worth it also depends on if this allows you to buy other things. Like, if this lets you get the physic and also lets you get a level 3 crap and you increase the maximum health of the entire party that way, then it's absolutely worth it. Now let's talk about boluses. These items do confer to your teammates if you're using that relic effect. Now at first, because of the UI, I thought that level 3 boluses gave you a temporary defensive buff. But then it actually turns out that they only give you temporary resistance to whatever status effect they correspond to. So these are worth leveling up if you manage to find one that corresponds to the day 3 boss status effect, but otherwise they're just underwhelming. Next, let's talk about throwing knives. There has been a lot of confusion about how they work at level 3, so let's clear this up. Throwing a knife at level 3 will give an enemy a 2% reduced defense debuff for 40 seconds. And yes, it's 2%, not 20%. To get the 20% debuff, you need to use 10 knives. Now the way this works is actually pretty cool, because each knife resets the duration of all knife debuffs that are applied. So for example, if I throw a knife at an enemy and wait 39 seconds to throw another one, then the whole stack of debuffs lasts for another 40 seconds. So the enemy is debuffed for 79 seconds overall. Now you might be thinking, oh, I can just extend this forever then, but no. Because when you reach 10 stacks, you stop being able to extend the duration more. And so what I recommend doing is to have a full stack of knives at hand, and start with 6 or 7 and then continue extending the debuffs for the rest of the fight. Now, knives don't deal a lot of damage, so I don't honestly see the point of stacking improved knife damage relics, so I kinda only use them for debuffing. And although the way they work is a bit convoluted, the debuff still makes them probably the second best tool that you can use. And so just like the boiled crab, every scholar should be making use of this. Especially when you consider that each shop sells an infinite amount of them, so there is no excuse. By the way, don't try to be clever and think that fan daggers would apply 5 stacks of debuffs at once. They don't. It doesn't matter how many of them hit, it's just a 2% debuff. The next category we have is reusable tools. There are 4 of these, being the Wraith Calling Bell, the Ancestor Spirit Head, and the 2 Omen Burns. These don't get any special effects, they just get damage. They also level up slower than any other item category. This is all to make up for the insane amount of damage you do with them at level 3, and the fact that you can use them infinitely as long as you have FP. So if you find any of these in the early or mid game, you can easily have them be an essential part of how you deal damage. Like seriously, it's almost like you're a dedicated caster. Now let's talk about perfumes. These are actually kind of insane. You thought the Perfumer Talisman only benefited spark aromatics? Well, think again. Because all other perfumes now have fire explosions that they can create, and these deal a somewhat decent amount of damage. Acid Spray Mist just activates the explosion when it hits enemies. Poison Spray Mist does the same thing, except it also deals some damage over time. And this damage has nothing to do with the poison buildup, so it just ends up dealing more damage overall. The Iron Jar Aromatic, the Uplifting Aromatic, and the Blood Boil Aromatic all activate when you get hit. The latter two also activate when their duration ends. This category is, well, unless I'm missing something, it's kinda shit. Like, don't get me wrong, the individual items can be very useful, but actively trying to level them up is a bit awkward. You're always guaranteed to find 4 perfumes at merchants, but you need 6 perfumes to get to level 3, so you'd probably need your teammates to give you some if you want to guarantee reaching level 3. Now, all the explosions can be boosted by the Perfumer Talisman and the boosted Perfumer Art Relics, and you can actually stack up to 3 of these relic effects and get respectable damage with perfumes. Although relics that make you start with perfumes are exclusive to Deep of Night. And you know what? I'm kinda completely fine with that, because it makes building for them a bit easier if you decide to do it. You'd still have to be very lucky and very dedicated though, and I'm not, for now at least. By the way, I forgot to mention that Bewitching Branches count as perfumes, so you can use them to level up this category. At level 3, these actually get a bigger area effect, and they apply a damage buff to the enemy that you use them on, making them deal much more damage when they attack other enemies. Next, let's talk about Magic Stone item things. This is a very weird category. It includes Warming Stones, Starlight Shards, and all of these damaging items that you find at mines and such. Now, at level 3, Starlight Shards will increase your maximum FP by a little bit. As for Warming Stones, at level 3 they start being able to very slowly revive your teammates. You're not really gonna be using them to revive though, instead you want to use them to maintain revive bars. So, if you have a down teammate that has 2 or 3 bars, then using this on them can prevent these bars from regenerating, and so make reviving them easier. And the best part is that because of the increased healing, they can easily bring your teammate back to full health when you revive them. I'm gonna call these 3 the Glintstone items, and these get nothing special at level 3, but their damage is pumped up to 11. Like, one of them can easily deal as much damage as a charged Wilder's ultimate. It's actually kind of insane. Gravity Stone fans leave lingering AoE damage, which does add up a lot. Gravity Stone Chunk though is just alright, like it pulls enemies towards it before exploding, but honestly the damage is just kinda decent, like lightning bots are way better. And honestly I consider the gravity items to be a bit underwhelming compared to the Glintstone ones. Overall, leveling up this category is almost a must just for the utility of Warming Stones, and you have no excuse for not leveling it up. Because like Starlight Shards are very easy to find at Sorcerer Rises, and both them and the Warming Stones are sold at both the normal shops and the day 3 shop. Finally, the big one, let's talk about pots. Pots just deal very good damage, and they can clear up trash mobs very quickly, and so building around them is absolutely worth it if you want to. Shops sell an infinite amount of fire pots, so you always have access to them if you have runes, and you can easily level them up. And this makes it so that relics that start you with a specific pot type, for example, be very useful, because you can just level up this category and use these later. Now, pot damage can be boosted by a talisman, and it can also be boosted by a relic effect that stacks with itself, so you can have multiple of these equipped at the same time to just deal very good damage. Now, every single pot gets a unique effect, so let's go over them. Fire pots leave lingering fire, dealing very decent damage for such a cheap item. Magic pots spawn follow-up projectiles that deal low damage. This one's kinda underwhelming in my opinion. Lightning pots deal damage twice, and this is by far the best one for damage. Holy pots heal you for a decent amount if you're in their range. Sleep pots leave a sleep cloud and it does no damage, but if you go inside it, then you recover a lot of FP. Poison and fetid pots leave clouds that deal poison buildup. In the case of the fetid pots, the clouds also deal their own damage over time. This has nothing to do with poison, they just do that. These two also apply a debuff that reduces enemy resistance against poison buildup. Rot pots inflict both poison and rot at the same time, and they also leave a cloud that deals some damage over time. Swarm pots have it so that the flies last a lot longer, and this just means that they'll deal more damage and bleed buildup. This pot also leaves a bloodstain on the ground, but this seems to be just cosmetic though. The volcano pot spews magma around, dealing a significant amount of damage. Both the alluring pot and the beast lure pot do a lot of damage over time. The freezing pot deals some damage over time, and it leaves frost on the ground that can explode, dealing a decent amount of damage. Rancor pots spawn spirits that damage the enemy afterwards. This deals a bit more damage than the lightning pot, and honestly these two and the freezing pot seem to be the best overall. Now, pots in general are very useful, and using them in a run is absolutely recommended. My only problem with them is that building a relic setup around them is very expensive. Like, you probably want to start with lightning pots, but you also want to stack 2 or 3 improved pot damage relic effects, and getting these effects with other good effects on the same relics is just very difficult. But now that you know what every item does, you should have all the tools that you need to make the most of this ability, so happy hunting. We're still not done though. Like, all of this time we were just talking about the passive, and we're still only scratching the surface. Crazy stuff. So let's talk about Scholar's skill, Analyze. You analyze enemies in order to use various buffs and debuffs. The more you analyze, the better buff that you'll get. Now, before we get into it, the first thing I want to say is that if you feel like the analysis camera is too slow, then you can actually change it in the settings menu, and this can help you catch enemies and allies inside it much easier. There are 2 sets of buffs and debuffs that you can use when you analyze. One is mapped to your left trigger and the other to your right trigger. There are 3 levels of analysis. Level 1 is just you pressing the button as soon as you can. Level 2 is when you press the button after it's halfway full. And level 3 is when the bar is completely filled up. The speed at which you scan enemies depends on how close you are to them. The closer you are, the faster the bar fills up. Now, you can easily dodge out of the scan, so it's actually very easy to use even at short range if you pay attention. First, let's talk about left trigger debuffs. At level 1, you make enemies deal 10% less damage. At level 2, you make them deal 20% less damage. And at level 3, you give them a debuff that makes them take 60% more damage on the next hit. I've seen people say that your teammates cannot take advantage of this, but this is not true. They absolutely can. I especially like to use this when an enemy is stance broken, because I can just get close, cast this, and have a teammate take the repost and deal more damage. This is one of the only times that this is consistently useful even for randoms. But overall, even with people that you know, taking advantage of this effect is very rare, because it will just get procced by weaker hits. And so I don't use this very often, and I always just start a fight by using the level 1 or level 2 debuff instead, because they're just extremely valuable. Like, because of how the math works, this is the equivalent of you giving your allies 25% more health, not just 20%, so it's even better than what it sounds like at first. Next, we have the right trigger buffs. At level 1, you give yourself more maximum stamina. At level 2, you give yourself even more of a stamina increase. These stamina buffs only apply to you and never to your teammates. And so how useful this is depends heavily on your playstyle. But overall, no matter what your playstyle is, the damage debuffs are always gonna be more valuable, so you should absolutely get these off first. At level 3, the right trigger redeems itself by giving us one of the coolest abilities in the entire game. You form a bubble around you that lasts just a second, but if an enemy attacks, then you take no damage and this bubble explodes, and the enemies get interrupted as they would if they were hit by an offensive ultimate. And this is absolutely amazing, because you can just stop some of the most annoying attacks in the game and give yourself an attack window. Now, here are a few tips for your scan. First, you should absolutely keep an eye out for free scanning opportunities. Things like phase transitions, spawning animations, stance breaks, and even AoE attacks when you're out of range can all be free ways to get a scan off or to get your bar filled up a bit. Next is that you should prioritize actually scanning your enemies a lot over getting higher level scans off every single time. You need to resist these intrusive thoughts and just use lower level scans sometimes. Level 3 scans are super situational. It's like diminishing returns in a sense. I mean, like I said, the 60% defense debuff is almost always gonna be procced by a weaker attack. And so sometimes you will have dealt more damage if you just attacked yourself instead of using this. The parry is very satisfying and fun to use, but if you're fishing for parries and wasting a lot of time doing so instead of just doing it on reaction or doing damage yourself, then you're just kinda throwing. So in general, level 2 scans are the sweet spot, and you should prioritize these most of the time, while keeping in mind that sometimes you should definitely use level 1 scans instead, especially if you're scanning from range. Now, I'm gonna blow your mind. Check this out. Here's me at the castle rooftop looking at an ancestor spirit. Look at this. Did you catch that? Did you see where my scan bar started? Yeah, it didn't start from the start, it started just below the halfway point. This is not because I pre-scanned this enemy. My scan bar actually cannot go below this point. So what is happening here? Well, every time you scan a different enemy type or enemy variant, you actually start to level up your scanning ability. And as a result of that, the scan bar gets to start at a higher and higher point. And this is extremely useful, because then using higher level buffs and debuffs will become much easier. So the optimal way to play Scholar is to scan every enemy you pass by, even if you don't fight them. Now let's talk about Scholar's ultimate, Communion. This is actually the simplest of his abilities, but it's still very versatile. What it does is that it links you and all nearby enemies and teammates. Any healing effects are shared between yourself and your teammates. Damaging an enemy makes all other linked enemies take 20% of the damage dealt. Hitting an enemy will also be healing the entire team for each hit. And so, as you might imagine, this makes gank fights much easier. There are many strategic ways of using this ultimate. Like if you're clearing out a camp, you can use it at the boss fight so that when you damage him, you start killing any trash mobs surrounding him. And if you straight up just can't find an enemy or boss in a point of interest, then you can just use this and start damaging nearby enemies, and you might just reveal the location of who you're looking for. Using the ultimate when a teammate is down will make it so that damaging enemies will also revive that teammate. This is especially useful if you combine it with a warming stone, and doing so will make reviving teammates with 3 bars much easier. Though for some reason you cannot damage enemies by reviving your teammates. I want you to join my Discord server. You know, being a part of a community while it's still small is very fun in my opinion. And I want you to come ruin it by joining, so that you can enjoy it while making it worse for those who come after. Just like the boomers did in America. We have an LFG channel where you can play Nightreign with me and other members of this community. There's no reason for you not to join. Link in the description below. Now let's talk relics, starting with the character specific ones. One effect says that it prevents the slowing down of character skill progress. This is a lie. It only reduces it by, how much? I think around 170% overall, but there is some human error here for sure. Either way, it reduces it by more than twice. So overall, this effect is pretty damn good, but I don't think it's amazing. Like, it's helpful for sure, but I would never dedicate a slot to it. Another effect buffs your allies' damage by 20% when you target them with your scan. This is very easy to do consistently, because you can always target allies and enemies at the same time, and you don't need to charge your scan at all in order to use this. And because of that, this is easily the best Scholar effect. And as long as you keep applying this, this is very close to being a must-have. Next, we have an effect that gives you runes for each additional enemy type that you scan. This gives you 1300 runes every time you scan a new enemy or enemy variant. And you can scan as many of these at the same time as you want, and you will still gain 1300 per enemy type. And there are no species that give you less than 1300. You already want to scan every new enemy type you find in order to level up your skill, so you really shouldn't need to change your playstyle in order to use this, and you're just getting a bunch of extra runes that you can use on the merchant to level up as many categories as you want. So to me, this is easily an A tier effect. Next, we have a relic effect that deals continuous damage to enemies linked with your ultimate. This easily makes Scholar's ultimate the most damaging ultimate in the entire game, because the damage this does is insane. It's like 600 per enemy, and it can obviously affect many enemies at once. Like, you can easily use this to clear up entire enemy camps or trivialize gank fights even more. Overall, this is easily an S tier effect, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a must-have. Next, we have 2 relic effects that are normally exclusive to Deep of Night, but they can also be used in regular mode if you buy pre-made relics that you can get from the Everdark shop. Now, one of these relic effects reduces vigor and increases your mind. Now, this only reduces vigor by 2, and it has an additional effect that gives you +3 vigor, so you're actually getting +1 vigor overall, meaning that you get a very small increase to your health. The increase to your FP bar here is gigantic. It puts Scholar in line with Revenant and Recluse in terms of FP. FP. The problem is, I don't see the point. Items that use FP use a very small amount. Only spells use tons of FP, and Scholar is not good at using those. Not to mention that Starlight Shards are extremely common. So overall, I don't like this one at all. If it gave you more intelligence, then I would love it, but it doesn't. Next, we have an effect that gives you much more dexterity and stamina in exchange for reduced arcane and intelligence. This completely changes how you can play this character, because you can basically become a DPS character. You have a bit less dexterity than Executor, but you still have more arcane, and you get a much better dodge. So calling this a better Executor is not very inaccurate actually. Overall, this is an amazing relic effect, but if you want to play with it, then you should probably lean fully into the DPS playstyle. Because if you still mainly play support, then this only prevents you from using relics that better fit that playstyle. Now let's talk about Scholar's Remembrance Relics. One of them gives you better skill cooldown and the effect that makes your skill buff your teammates' damage, and this makes it much easier to keep this buff up. This also has the effect that slows down your skill decay, and I said this effect wasn't worth dedicating a slot to, and this is why this relic is so amazing, because it has an S tier effect and it just gives you this effect for free. So this relic is easily S tier and very hard to replace. The other Remembrance Relic gives you the effect that applies damage over time with your ultimate, and it gives you an effect that charges your ultimate when you kill enemies. Now this second effect is amazing because the amount of charge you get is actually very significant. Now just so you know, your ultimate immediately starts to recharge as soon as you use it, not when it runs out. With that in mind, using this relic results in the fact that you can just go around and spam your ultimate non-stop, because this will help you kill a bunch of trash mobs and get a bunch of ultimate charge back that way. Overall, I think this is very strong, but considering how many good relics are there for Scholar, I can only give this A tier for now. This also gives you improved affinity damage negation, which is always appreciated, I guess. Now this is the best part. Let's talk about relic setups. I have 5 builds for this character, and they all use pre-made relics. They are all viable and very fun to use, so let's go over each one of them. This boss has AIDS, and it's all because I keep switching which weapon I use on him, so that I can apply as many status effects as possible. And the main relic that we're using, which is the Knight of the Lord relic, complements this playstyle perfectly, because it applies a random affinity buff to my weapon each time I switch weapons, and it just gives me a straight up attack power buff when I do that. This playstyle is a lot of fun, and it is very effective. In addition to this relic, we're using these 2 relics, and we already talked about how amazing these are. The next build I have is the Bloodborne BC port. This one's my favorite by far. If you follow this channel, then you absolutely knew this was coming. Here, I lean fully into the melee DPS playstyle, and I just become a Bloodborne character. First, I have the relic that gives me much more dexterity and stamina, and I have another slot that is dedicated to the partial HP restoration upon post damage attacks effect. What this does is that it gives you the Bloodborne rally mechanic. You get some time to recover any health that you lose by attacking enemies right after getting hit. And this is probably still the second best relic effect for melee characters, just because of how much it increases survivability. Finally, we have what is probably the best relic effect for melee characters, and this is actually from the Undertaker Remembrance. Yui made a whole video about why this is the best relic for damage on melee characters, and he's totally right. The damage increase you get from this is totally insane, and it lasts a very long time. When you use stamina buffs with this setup, you get a disgustingly big stamina bar, and you just never have to stop attacking that way. Parrying is also easier than usual, because you stay a lot in melee range, where your skill charges up faster. Finally, for this setup, you really want to stack damage negation buffs. The reason why is because if you lose less health, then you can recover it easier with the Bloodborne relic. So boiled crab is even more mandatory here. Next, I have a Wraith calling Bell build. Basically, I just used these 2 amazing relics that we already talked about with a relic that makes me start with the Wraith Calling Bell. Now, as I said, the bell is so good that you can basically become a dedicated caster if you want. Obviously, you still want to play in melee range sometimes to apply status effects, but you can still deal an insane amount of damage from a distance. There is not much more to talk about here, except that you should know that the bell deals magic damage, and so you should absolutely be on the lookout for improved magic damage perks. And if you find a relic that has the bell and has magic attack power up, then these effects will synergize perfectly with each other. Next, I have a build that I call the Loot Goblin. The idea here is to combine the pre-made relic that lets you deal damage with your ultimate with the effect that makes you get runes each time that you scan a new enemy type, and these 2 synergize together very well. Like, you just make your way to a point of interest, you scan the enemies there, and you kill them all with the ultimate. And you'll get tons of runes that you can use to level up any item categories that you want. The final relic setup I have is the Invisible Analyzer, and with this I use the Knight of Miasma relic. This makes you go invisible each time you proc Frostbite on a nearby enemy, and this lets you get close to bosses and enemies and be able to scan them as much as you want. And because your enemies are not targeting you, this can make parrying much easier, because you can just walk into their attacks and activate it instead of having to react to them. This relic also makes you deal more damage against frostbitten enemies, and you get the Chilling Mist Ash 4, which lets you apply Frostbite very quickly. I'm pairing this with the Remembrance Relic that we talked about, and the random relic that lets me confer items to my teammates, and that is because there is not a chalice that lets me use these 2 relics with the Knight of the Fathom. I think this is all that I had to say. If you found this video to be useful, useful, then please leave a like, a comment, and maybe subscribe. I'm sure there are a few things that I missed, so if you know any of those, then please let me know in the comments below. Also, I made guides for pretty much all other characters, so if you want to know more about them, consider watching those next. So, see you in the next one. Bye-bye!